All right, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all our speakers and to all our viewers who are tuning in live from across the globe. I'm Sakina Bhatt and I'm the moderator for today's panel. Welcome to the virtual event of Freedom Hour, an online event hosted by Asia Freedom Institute, a nonprofit organization that promotes religious freedom and democracy in Tibet and China. Today's panel, we will be talking about China's education policy in East Turkestan, Southern Mongolia, and Tibet, and how this policy is tied to the larger wave of repression in these three regions. This is one of the most important topics to be discussed, and I'm glad to be having this discussion with representatives of the three communities, the Uyghur, the Tibetan, and the Southern Mongolian. We have uh, Mr. Abdulweli Ayub, Uyghur linguist and former political prisoner. We have Dr. Gyalo, Tibetan activist and educational sociologist. And we have Mr. Dugarjab El Hotala, founding director of Inter-Mongol Network. A very warm welcome to our dear panelists to AFI's discussion. And I would like to tell our viewers that I have kept the introduction of our speakers really short so that we'll have more time for our discussion. And before I start, let me quickly run you through the agenda for today. So we will be starting off with 4 general questions intended for all our 3 speakers, followed by um, 2 individual questions each for all our speakers, and all our speakers will have 3 minutes to give your answers for each questions. And I request our speakers to please stick to the time limit so that we don't exceed our time way too much and make it extra lengthy. So without further ado, I think I will start off with the first general question. And Mr. Abdulweli, I think I'll start with you, okay? All right, so the first general question is, can you briefly describe the current educational policies in the Chinese government towards the Mongolian, the Tibetan, and the Uyghur communities? What are the primary issues and what are your major concerns? How are how are the education policies tied to the larger wave of repression and the overall assimilation and Sinicization in East Turkestan, Southern Mongolia, and Tibet? And how is the Chinese government justifying the current policies that seem to go against its own laws protecting minority languages and the cultural practices? Mr. Abdulweli, the screen is yours.
Thank you. Thank you all. Chinese educational policy against the Tibetan and the Mongolian and the Uyghurs, they are almost similar. Like now, like at the beginning, from since 1949 and for Tibet in 1959, they started bilingual education. It means that main educational language is Uyghur, Mongolian, and Tibet, but there are Chinese as a subject. But after like 1990s, especially for Uyghurs, it's 1992, and for Tibetan and for Mongolian, it's different time period. And it started another type of bilingual education. It means that natural science teach in Chinese, and the social science teach in Uyghur and the Mongolian and the Tibetan. And after 1997, it started another policy that like Uyghur students, they recruited in Chinese different schools in like 19 Chinese provinces. It started for Tibetan earlier, like Tibetan boarding school started like 1960s something. But for Uyghur, the boarding school started a little bit late. It's in 1992, and it reached its peak. It's in 2004, and every year it's thousands of students recruited to Chinese schools. And also inside, like in East Turkestan and in Tibet and in Mongolia, Chinese language hours increased, and then in 2004, Uyghur and Tibetan and Mongolian became one subject, and then other courses started to teach in Chinese. Like it means that from the beginning to 2004, like the ethnic languages like Uyghur and Tibetan and Mongolian become like the hours become decreased, and the priority become less and less. Now, in like when we if we use Uyghur as a case, like there is no Uyghur course in schools since 2016 September. Like Uyghur courses all banned, and another that like Uyghur like high school like college entrance exam, like the student cannot take in Uyghur, in Tibetan, in Mongolian. So like and then uh, the boarding school is our priority for Tibetan. I don't know about Mongol, but for Tibetan and the Uyghur, like boarding school is the priority for both of us, because like student, if even they have like most of the courses in like all of the courses in Chinese, but if they can stay at home, they will learn their own religion, their language, their culture at home. But the boarding school is really dangerous, because I met 6 Uyghur kids. They came in 2019, 2023, and 2024 this year. They went to boarding school. The 6 of them, that they forgot their language completely. I met them. They forgot their language completely. So now I think for Uyghurs and for like Tibetan, the boarding school is our priority, and we should fight to stop this boarding school issue, because it will wipe these languages out. It will dangerous for both Uyghur and Tibetan. Maybe it's Mongolian. I don't know about that, but it's priority for Mongolian and Tibetan right now.
Thank you so much, Mr. Abdulwadi Ayub. And thank you for giving us a really good start for today's discussion. And thank you for letting us know like when it all started with specific year. And it was really nice to know about your personal encounter with the Uyghur students at the boarding school. Thank you so much. Let's hear Dr. Gallo's perspective on this.
Okay, thank you for Ayub's brief statement, and I think I'm not going to repeat Ayub's content. Here, what I'm thinking about the Uyghur, Mongolian, and the Tibetan, we are facing the same challenge of the China's colonization. Of course, there are similarities and particularities existed at the same time due to our cultural and historical background, and also the China treats the three nations in different way. Sometimes. At the beginning, to achieve the ideological conspiracy of China's on those Mongolian and the Tibetan and the Uyghur people, they took long-term, very effective tool, that is the school education policy. So in Tibet, I engaged Tibetan education policy and the curriculum struggle nearly 30 years. China even could not have a same definition of the bilingual education and the language and education policy. With the different place, they implemented different policy. That's the stratify the case in a diverse way. And again, since 1994, 1984, or 80, all those boarding schools are resumed from the Cultural Revolution. Then at the beginning, for our older generation's effort on the minorities' right, the China central government also, Chinese government also consider zero open policy. We got a little bit of space for our education, objectively. And at that time, we got the different model of the bilingual education. Tibetan as a one subject, the bilingual model, and the Chinese as a one subject bilingual model. But the problem here is the content of the curriculum are exactly the same as the Chinese textbook. Those are poorly translated into Tibetan, Uyghurs, and Mongolian language. That's how they achieved their colonial goal throughout the education system. In 1995 or 8, I wrote an article, Chinese article, criticized their diversified definition of the bilingual education, which was they have a 26 different definition of the bilingual education on minority education, which include Uyghurs, Mongol, and Tibet. So since then, particularly since Xi Jinping stabilized his second term in 2018, he changed the entire political and social atmosphere into the firmly assimilate the agenda. That's how they, as the Ayub described it. There's no Tibetan, Uyghur, and Mongolian language subject in the school system. That's almost completely against China's constitution. China has a constitution. If you read it, it's beautiful. But on the reality, they implemented the contradictory way. That's our situation now.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gallo, for speaking about how China is going against their own laws and how they are not implementing what has been written in the law. Thank you so much. And Mr. Dugarjab, let's hear your perspective on this.
Sorry, I forgot to turn my mic on. So when it comes to education, what I would call the colonial education in these three major colonial regions. So more than being education, the ultimate and the highest goal is assimilation. So when we talk about education in the Chinese colonies, the regions or the nations that are being colonized under the People's Republic of China nowadays, when we talk about education, first and foremost, we have to talk about language, because language is the focus of the education and language is where all the problems occur. So we hear the term bilingual education a lot in Chinese, the Chinese speech, especially of lately. The time I started hearing this term was probably in the 1980s, but not as frequently as today. The more they talk about bilingual education, the less our languages are actually promoted. So I would say the real goal of bilingual education is monolingual education. So although in different regions they are talking about bilingual, okay, in Tibet they're talking about Tibetan and Chinese, Uyghur and Chinese, and in Mongol regions it's Mongolian and Chinese. But the real goal is to get rid of the other language and furthering the Chinese language. And the other language will step by step will be phased out. Same in Tibet, same in Mongolia, same in Tibet, same in East Turkistan. That is the large, the overall similarity, but there are uniqueness in each region. For instance, in the example of Mongolian regions, there are historical regions because the Chinese, because of the geographical proximity of especially the so-called Inner Mongolia autonomous region to Chinese provinces, the influx of Chinese immigration started way early, late 19th centuries, or even late 19th century or the beginning of 20th century. So the Sinicization among these three regions, the Mongols are actually at the most seriously affected. So when it comes to educational system, there are three things. One is the boarding school system. And even before the establishment of People's Republic of China in the late 1940s, some part of the so-called Inner Mongolia, they were already being influenced by Chinese boarding systems, while the communists were not in Beijing yet, while they were in Yan'an, parts of Inner Mongolia were affected by the boarding school system, saying that we are going to give you free education, free modern education. In fact, it's all aimed at indoctrinating, brainwashing people to be communists. And nowadays, in the late 90s and 2000s especially, because of the ecological destruction, here's several things all connected together. The Chinese government intentionally, in a planned way, they transfer large amount of Chinese population into these regions, and that will create ecological destruction. And then in the end of the ecological destruction, they say, oh, your traditional way of life, especially we are Mongolians as nomadic pastoralists, and that's the problem, and we need to change it, and then stop herding. That is the nomadic pastoralism gives Mongols the distinct characteristics that are so apart from Chinese, and the Chinese have long resented that. So taking advantage of these problems, they say, in order to resolve the ecological problem, we need to move you out of the urban areas. You need to concentrate in towns and cities. And that way, with that excuse, they close down the Mongol school, and then either close down or integrate them, combine them with the existing Chinese schools. So it looks like I'm over my time, and sorry about that. There are
It's all right. It's all right.
more things I would like to say, but due to time constraints, I'll stop here.
Sure, sure. It's okay. Thank you so much, Mr. Dugarjab, and thank you for letting us know about the China strategy about bringing the Han Chinese into all the three regions. Thank you so much, and we'll talk more about the language policy in the upcoming question. So China's bilingual policy in practice is replacing Mongolian, Tibetan, and Uyghur languages as a primary medium of instruction, right? This downgrading and replacement of mother tongue have led thousands to come and protest. So what are your views on the role of language in education, and what is driving this shift from the bilingual to Chinese-only education, and how is this shift affecting the social and cultural fabrics of your communities? We'll start with Abduveli. Mr. Abduveli, the screen is yours.
Yeah, like I want to stress one point that in East Turkestan we have Mongolian, and so like when Uyghur education restricted, at the same time Mongol education also restricted, and when Uyghur courses deleted from the curriculum, and the Mongolian also deleted from the curriculum. So like Uyghur situation is representative for like Mongolian and the Kazakh and the Kyrgyz schools as well in East Turkestan. Yeah, like this, like especially 2004, like the Chinese so-called bilingual education change it into like monolingual education, and Uyghur is just Uyghur and the Kazakh and Mongol also just one of the subjects. After this language policy changed, it affected people's thought. People sent their kids to pure Chinese school, and they started to move big cities to send their kids to pure Chinese school. Because of like in a rural area and in urban area and in like Uyghur dominant cities, even Chinese government implemented that monolingual policy because of the teachers, because of the equipment. They could not reach the goal in a short time, and people, the kids were suffered there because of there is education in Chinese, but there is no enough teacher, there is no enough book to support, and because of that, people moved to big cities to provide their kids higher, the good education, and then the signification become so overwhelming and so become so popular among Uyghur community. This is the first. Second, self-confidence, like Uyghurs' self-confidence become weak, and the Uyghur books also not sold really well. It's because of education policy change. The Uyghur books publishing industry also influenced. Not also in like publishing industry, this media, like the Uyghur movies and the Uyghur film series will not produce anymore because of there is no enough market. So like it just like a chain, one part blocked, and it influenced other parts of Uyghur society. And like I can make one example that like in to 1998, we have in Kashgar, we have 12 bookstores, private bookstores. But in 2008, it left like half of them, like 6 survived, others are closed. It's because of the education policy. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Abduveli. We'll move on to Dr. Gallo. Dr. Gallo, let's hear your perspective.
Okay. In terms of the language policy shift, I think different time they use a different strategy to minimize the practice of the language in the society of Uyghur, Mongol, and Tibetan society. For me, from a sociological perspective, I think they did three type of the constraints being implemented in the three regions. First, material constraint. Second, the structural constraint. And then the third one, the sanctions. So material constraint means they're no longer supporting where a social space where speaking and using Tibetan language. Second, the structural constraint, which means they're shutting down the higher education institution. That's a completely cut off your language from the intellectual institution. So that's deeply affected the knowledge reproduction. And the language is the key. Language is one of the language in the society is a two sides of a coin. You can't separate it. When you separate, it affects harm the entire entity of the society. The language allow you to access the traditional knowledge that they're cutting off. The language, informing the people's way of the thinking that they're cutting off from the school system. The language, tightly bind with culture. The culture is the language, language is the culture. Language conveys culture. Language transforms the culture, but they're cutting off from the school system. The Uyghur, Mongolian, and the Tibetan people have the right to practice their language and their culture as a citizen of China. But it's a real citizen. They're giving the real right of the citizen. No, they're treating as another form of the citizen. It's not really deeply appreciated a citizen. So the language policy manipulated by the state governing system, authority system. It's not a single person. It's a part of their entire ideological agenda, which is their governing power in the society, every corner of the society, in the Uyghur and the Mongolian and the Tibetan society. They're manipulating the language and the way of the cultural practices. So that's how they dominating. That's how they're achieving their colonial agenda. That's how they're achieving the assimilative goal.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gallo. We'll move on to Mr. Duwarjab. Let's hear your perspective.
Yes, thank you. So as we discussed before, that when we talk about education in the colonial regions under China, we can't talk about education without talking about the language. And this is actually more crucial, in my opinion, for the Mongols, because language now is almost the only thing that we are left with. They have dismantled our traditional way of life. The herders cannot anymore any longer can any longer live like before, and the kids are being sent to boarding school and further to all sorts of colleges and other schools to be brainwashed basically, and then they become half and half, not Mongol entirely, not Chinese entirely, not countryside person entirely, not city folk entirely, just half and half useless people. And they end up, actually the Mongol kids end up physically in the city because they can't, going back to countryside, they can't keep herds anymore. And even parts of the region where the more traditional way of life is possible, but these kids have already become useless people because they can't keep herds. They don't like, because they don't like doing that because of the influence of the Chinese culture and city life. And then in the city, they are not really having a good, decent life because of who they are and what they have learned. They have learned basically nothing, and then they may have learned a little bit of everything. So this is the result of the overall educational policies aimed at first, getting you apart, getting you away from your root, getting you away from your community, from your language and cultural heritage. And you all may know that in 2020, the Chinese government started implementing a new policy in educational institutions in the elementary and primary schools to literally banning Mongolian language people from being taught in schools. And in the beginning, they said, well, this is not a language ban. We are only testing out how it goes by teaching 3 subjects only in Mongolian. That was in 2020. Still, people protested, and thousands of people arrested, and 7 people suicided in protest, committed suicide. But the policy went ahead, and by 2023, by the new school year, all courses were quietly transitioned to being taught in Chinese. Going forward, there is no more Mongolian. The Mongolian, when I was undergoing school, we were learning everything in Mongolian, and there was one subject called Chinese. And it started, in my case, it started at 3rd grade. And still, no kid will learn that. And most kids are bad at Chinese. And only when I was in 7th grade, I decided to, okay, let me make some efforts on this. And I spent 1 year and my Chinese improved because I needed that. That's only in my case. So nowadays, it's completely the opposite. There's one subject called Mongolian, but then no kid will learn that because of the general overall social pressure, the artificially created Chinese majority social structure. Your language is useless. Walking out of your home, at best, you can speak to your parents or to your close ones, close, relatives and friends. But walking out, you'll speak Chinese for everything. So that is all calculated, in my opinion. So therefore, that is what is going on. And in addition to banning the language in schools, nowadays they are expanding it to the whole society. You will be criticized if, in government offices and in in public spaces if you speak Mongolian. You'll be suspected of you have something wrong in your, you have wrong idea. You are not totally loyal to the Chinese nation. So, and then in Khokhot, the regional capital of the so-called Inner Mongolia Autonomous Region, all things showing Mongolian characteristics. For example, a pattern, a Mongolian writing on a business name, all are being removed. And even if you work for the government, you will be questioned about your just casual photographs in which you are wearing traditional Mongolian clothing. And they will say, oh, you are not being really fully ready to be a good citizen because you have, yes, my time is up. So my time is up. So thank you.
It's all right. Thank you so much, Mr. Dovarja, for letting us know about for letting us know about your first-hand experience that you have experienced personally, the shift of the language. And Mr. Abdulwali Ayub also gave us a really good example about the bookstore and how this language policy has been affecting the Uyghur community. And Mr. And Dr. Gello also told us about this really productive and this really informative knowledge about the three constraints. Thank you so much, and we'll move on with the third general question. So religion has traditionally been the main form of organized education in the three communities that you represent. How has this changed under the current education policies adopted by the Chinese government? And what role do you see for religion if the three communities are able to develop their own curriculum and formulate an independent education policy? Mr. Abdulwali, we'll start with you again. You have to unmute your mic, Mr. Abdulwali.
Could you repeat your question? I didn't really get what's the meaning.
Mr. Abdulwali, so religion, it has traditionally been the main form of organized education in the three communities that you represent, right? So how has this changed under the current education policies of the Chinese government? And what role do you see for religion if the three communities are able to develop their own curriculum and formulate an independent education policy?
Actually, it is, but in the reality, it's not. Because for Uyghur and for Tibetan, religion is important for Uyghur identity and the Tibetan identity. It's also Mongolian. It's also important, but religion also strong challenge to Chinese authority. Yeah, for three nations, the religion is important. It's core their identity. But for Chinese government, it's different story. It is the main enemy of the state. So after this, it is also from this language policy and this religious policy are related. Like when Uyghur or Tibetan or Mongolian restricted, their religious practice also restricted. When their lifestyle, for example, Tibetan lifestyle and Mongolian lifestyle and Uyghur lifestyle forced to change, the religion also forced to modify, forced to sinifies, serve to communist state or socialist country or something like that. So it is related. Chinese language policy, the educational policy, and the Chinese religious policy also at the same speed. And for example, that in 1996, China issued number 7 document, 7号文件 in Chinese. It stressed that the main threat to so-called Xinjiang stability are illegal religious activity and the separatism. Illegal religious activity means the religion, and the separatism means the people's identity. And so when Chinese government started this hard strike policy to against Uyghur, they mainly target the religion and the identity. So in 1997, the boarding school in Chinese provinces increased, and then Uyghur students who recruited those schools, they have to sign that I don't believe Islam, I don't believe religion. They have to sign. Like all of the students, I have seen that form. Like all of the students who selected to go to those boarding schools, they have to sign that I don't believe religion. That's, you have to. Without that, you can't go to those like Chinese boarding school. And another that when this boarding school become popularized in East Turkestan, and those kids they have to promise that they don't believe Islam, and they also they have to promise that their parents will not practice Islam as well. Not only those students, like they have to write the promise letter that they should stop their parents to believe in religion. And another that because of Uyghur, we use Arabic alphabet, and in Chinese government, Arabic alphabet related to Quran, the Islam holy book. And then when this language restriction started, those books in Uyghur script also started to ban, because of the religion and scripture is related. It's the same scripture. So religious oppression directly influenced to language oppression. And the third point that because of the people cannot, especially since 2014, people cannot practice their religion, and they started to read those books about religion or the books with the religious content. And then those books started to burn, especially in 2017 April. In East Turkestan, Chinese government searched house by house, burned those books written by Uyghur imprisoned writers. Now, according to my study, there are 126 Uyghur writers imprisoned, and their books also burned. So the language policy and the religious policy is related, and the language oppression and the religious oppression also related, and it is at the same level. One increased another, so it's really in connection. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Abdulweli. We will move forward with Dr. Gallo.
From my point of view, religion has a multiple function in society. I think it's similarly with the Uyghur society and the Mongolian society, particularly Mongolian and the Tibetan share the same Buddhist tradition. The religion is a part of a way of the life. Religion is the content of their spirituality. Religion is the way of the cultural practices. In Tibet, I call this, there are multifunctional institutions of the monastery. The monastery plays a key role in practicing and reproducing the knowledge. That also supports two levels of micro and macro social structure. That's not this subject. I'm not going to go detail about that. But when you see the religions, the fundamentally supports human who have a strong morality, obey the morality. That's why in Tibetan society, we have people have gently obeyed our cultural rules, the traditions, everything. That's why our society is very gentle. When I was young, I clearly remember nobody locking the door in the village. It's so peaceful. But now you have extra lockers, still not safe. That's the consequence of the removing the religion from the social sphere. And to Chinese government or the CCP system, they don't want to see any authority system coexisted beside them. But the religious organization and the religious institution plays that role. So when in Mongolian and in Uyghur and in Tibetan society, the religion plays a key role in their social life. Therefore, they have a religious authority system. But the CCP and the Chinese government doesn't want to see this. Any alternative authority system that coexisted with them in the society. But our people want it, our people need it. But they have a power. They're now firmly implementing the so-called patriotic education law. And they're legalizing the repressive action on the religious institution and the religious life. That's all about. Religion, as Chairman Mao before said, religion is a poison. He said that to His Holiness Dalai Lama when he was in Beijing. Is it really? The religion is a poison? They see the poison because they don't want to see any authority system existed beside them. That's how religion became a poison from their perspective. So of course now the entire social environment, cultural and the political environment is under such pressure that the religious is a key part of that.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gallo. So we will move on with the last general question. Given the key role of the younger generation in sustaining the cultural identity and language, how can the youths in your region and in diaspora be empowered and supported to embrace and carry forward their cultural heritage, especially in the face of the ongoing assimilation pressures where China is specifically targeting the younger generation? Mr. Abdulweli.
Let's talk about hope. When I talk about this diaspora, I always talk about hope because yes, it is happening there. The boarding school, even like for Uyghurs, it's special part that boarding kindergarten. This is special for Uyghur, not for Tibet, not for Mongolian, because Chinese government since 2021 they started new policy that Uyghur kids should go to boarding school since 3 years old. They have to stay in boarding kindergarten. This boarding kindergarten concept is new for everyone here because it's just for Uyghurs. Yes, like in diaspora, um, we have a lot of opportunity actually. We are separated in different places, in different cities, in different countries, but we have internet connected all of us, just like we are living in Delhi and in different part of the world, but we are discussing about Chinese education policy that our kids also can do this. They can share their language on internet, and they can play video game on internet, and they can watch the same cartoon on internet. Recently, one of my friends posted that the Mongolia should produce online content. It will be helpful to kids in South Mongolia. Yeah, it's really good. Like even we can't physically reach our kids in East Turkestan, in Tibet, in Mongolia, in South Mongolia, but our content will reach if we produce such a content. So, like our responsibility we should produce language content to those kids in diaspora, and somehow it will be accessible to the kids in East Turkestan, in Tibet, or in Inner Mongolia. This is the first. Second, we can develop some apps, some language learning apps. For example, we tried one in 2022 for for Uyghur learners, for beginners. It was welcomed by parents in diaspora, and I can't say but most of the people who download not from outside of China, inside of China, they downloaded those apps inside of China. They even found a way to do it. So, like second, we can develop like language learning app, cultural practice app, or something like that. And the third, yes, it is Uyghur books and the Mongolian books and Tibetan books banned in China. And we can encourage our writers in diaspora to write in Uyghur, in Mongolian, in Tibetan. I think we should have a scholarship for those writers. Like Sri community, we should think about this. We should support those writers who write in their national language, like Uyghur, Tibetan, or Mongolian, because of in diaspora, it's really hard to any ethnic Uyghur or any Tibetan or Mongolian to write in their own language and to support themselves. So we should have an organization, or we should have a special funding to support those writers to produce this language content. And the fourth, we should have something like language Olympic or something like that. We should encourage those kids to come together to compete each other to speak that language, speak like Tibetan, speak Uyghur, and speak Mongolian. And the fifth, that this is the testing point for every one of us. Do we really love this language? Do we really love this culture? Yes, if we do, we should work something. We should do something. We should show that, yes, it is oppressed in China. It is demolished in China. It's banned in China, but we are here. We are doing this. We are promoting this. We are keeping those language alive because we are here. So like these points are testing. These points are asking questions for us. So if we are honest, if we speak from our heart, we should take those steps to keep those languages alive. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Abdulweli. And I would like to ask Mr. Dugurjab to please respond to the third question regarding religion. Apologies, we have missed your perspective. So the screen is yours, Mr. Dugurjab.
Thank you. So, in terms of religion, as for now, I would say that Tibetans and Uyghurs have actually better advantage because, you know, religion, the destruction to religion in all these three regions, what the Chinese have done to Mongols is the most serious. As a result, nowadays you're talking to Mongolians, especially younger generation of Mongols. Most of them would claim that they have no religious beliefs whatsoever, and even some are actually quite antagonistic toward religion, because of the the decades-long brainwashing propaganda and the generation by generation going through Chinese educational system. They have the idea of the religion is poison, but in a different way, saying that the Mongols were made weaker compared to the Genghis Khan's time because of the Tibetan Buddhism. The Tibetan Buddhism pacified Mongols in spirit, and eventually, consequently, Mongols became weaker. It has some points, but all in all, it's not correct. So that doesn't mean that the Mongolian Buddhism or whatever other religion there may be, because there are Mongols who believe in Islam. There are Mongols who believe in Christianity, although they are not the majority, but there are such things. And the overall majority of Mongols still at least identify as cultural Buddhists. So it's all seeped into your identity, into your language, into your cultural tradition that built up. It's almost impossible to take out all the religious contents from your language and your language still exist. That's not possible. So that is one side. And the other side is that because, the Mongols have an independent part that is known as Mongolia. Although that is only the core part, and size-wise, it's actually smaller than the rest of the Mongolia that is under China and under Russia too, Buryatia, Kalmykia. So the most important thing that connects all these, divided Mongol regions, one is language, and the other comes to religion, and particularly to Tibetan Buddhism, to the Dalai Lama, to Bogdo Khan, figures like that. So religion is still very important. And then also with younger generations being face to face with the modern world, reading books from the West and knowing new things. Some people, some younger generations are actually, coming into new realization that all the education about what religion is and what religion does that we were taught about was actually not correct. So there is actually new realization, new waking up to our own tradition, including the religious tradition and other things. So there is hope. So especially when it comes to religion, you may all know that Tibetan and Mongols have very strong ties historically, and based on religion. So that is one way we can connect with it, one another. And then with Uyghurs as well, we are in the same language group, Altaic language. Lots of words we share with Uyghurs and Kazakh and other Turkic-speaking people. And partially Uyghurs also were, nomadic people, especially in history. And Tibetans have similar lifestyle as well. So there is a way, that is one of the ways we can connect with each other, unlike the Chinese, So it's very important to me, even though some people being non-religious, that doesn't mean religion is not important. It's still very significantly important for the Mongols as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Dugurja, for this really informative note on religion. And so we will move forward with the fourth individual question. And I would like to repeat the question for Dr. Gello once again. Dr. Gello, given the key role of the younger generation in sustaining the cultural identity and language, how can the youths in your region be in region and in diaspora be empowered and supported to embrace and carry forward their cultural heritage, especially when all this assimilation is going on by the Chinese government? The screen is yours.
It is very clear. The future is based on what we prepared now. The future is depends on young generation. The young generations are seed of our national hope in the future. But they entered China's colonial boarding school. They designed the way that China wanted to see them in the future, not in our way. I think the Uyghur people and the Mongolian people and the Tibetan were facing the same great challenges of each nation's future under China's same colonial boarding school system. The way we needed to do is we needed to expand our own cultural social space on the ground. And I needed to build up the cultural social environment for our young generation, even in oral community. That will pull back our kids from their assimilative classroom. In diaspora as well. In diaspora, we have a much more advantage in the free time and the free access to our own culture and the language, to practice our language. It depends on us. It depends on how you manage your daily lifetime. If you spend more time, you have more time to practice your language and culture. We need to increase the awareness of the national identity, which is constituted by culture and the language. Without the culture and language, there's not much things to talk about identity. So the future identity, the future, the cultural practices, all depend on our younger generation. Please keep up in practicing your own language and culture.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gello. And I would like to, the next question is for Mr. Dugurjab. Mr. Dugurjab, if you are there, can I please hear your perspective on the youth? Mr. Dugurjab, I think Mr. Dugoja will take quite some time, so I would like to move forward with the individual question to Mr. Abdulweli Ayub. And due to our time constraint, I think I will have to merge the first and the second individual question to Mr. Abdulweli. Okay, so I'll just move forward with Mr. Dugoja. Apologies, Mr. Abdulweli. Mr. Dugoja, can I have your perspective on the fourth general question regarding the youth? How can you empower them in your community to maintain the language and the cultural identity?
Can you hear me this way? Because
Yeah, sure.
without
Yeah, I can
using
hear you.
okay.
Yeah, sure, it's clear.
So, well, I agree with what the previous speakers say about the younger generation and how they can, carry on with their language and other cultural heritage. And peculiar to the Southern Mongolian situation, there is something called linguistic refugees are emerging. What that means is basically the Chinese have banned the Mongolian language from being taught in schools, and the publications and other sorts of creative activities are being restricted. And recently, I had an idea about translating children's story from English into Mongolian, and I talked with an editor in Khokhot. And in the end, the conclusion was it's not possible to translate things from and get them published from foreign language into Mongolian. It's not favored by the authorities. You have to have a Chinese version of that book published already, and then you can only translate it from Chinese into Mongolian. And things like that, sometimes you look at the situation, it would look like there is no way out. They have all, blocked all the exits. So especially in terms of sending your kids to schools, Mongolian schools, to be educated in Mongolian language. So some people are, seeing that and then deciding, okay, I'm not going to anymore stay here. I don't have to, because, well, in some ways you have to, because there is restriction of leaving China as well. So some parents are actually, immigrating to, or with all sorts of excuse, maybe work, business, and study themselves. I think the main goal is to go to Mongolia with their kids, bringing their kids to the independent country of Mongolia and get them educated there. And we are calling these people linguistic refugees. This is a new phenomenon. So the Chinese, of course, they will be aware pretty soon, and then they may, take measures against this as well. So that's one way of, how to carry on with our language and traditional culture. And of course, others talked about, doing digital publications, and especially nowadays, young kids, they cannot live without smartphones, computers, and accordingly we have to have contents. And then when it comes to Mongolians under China, there are contents, all sorts of contents available in Mongolia, and then the Chinese are also taking measures against people taking those contents directly from Mongolia and republishing it or spreading it in southern Mongolia, because they are afraid that those things can to them the negative effect can, have negative effect on Mongolian kids. So still, this is an age of computers and internet, so the Chinese cannot block everything, even if they can, but there are ways to go around it. So, what we talked about, creating contents and publications, in some ways still work out, and it seems to be the only way.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Dugarjab. And I really wish I could hear more about your insights, but due to time constraint, I think we'll have to even limit the individual questions. And I think I'm going to merge the two individual questions into one. And I request all our speakers to please keep it short and and not exceed it so much, because we have already exceeded our time limit. So without further ado, I'll start with Mr. Ayub. So Mr. Ayub, you have been educating the Uyghur children in the diaspora community about their culture and identity through your storytelling, right? So could you elaborate on how your writings, which has tales of homeland and heritage with the realities of life in the new countries, contribute to maintaining cultural awareness among young Uyghurs? And what feedback have you been receiving from the children and their parents about the effectiveness of your books in fostering a sense of Uyghur identity? Also, I would like to know, because you had been putting a lot of effort in promoting the Uyghur language and culture, right? And you were even arrested for that. So can you also tell us what kind of risk do people have to go who oppose this policy, who oppose this Chinese policy, Mr. Ayub? Mr. Ayub, you'll have to unmute your mic.
Oh, sorry about that.
Yeah, it's all right.
Like in China, those language activists paid serious price, and we are alive. Like I know another Tibetan language activist also arrested and sentenced, and but we have 3 Mongolian teachers they suicided. It's really sad to protect the language, and yeah, like we are still outside. We are promoting this language. Like I'm doing this to instruct mother language teachers around the world and encourage mother language schools around the world. And also, I'm writing books for kids. It is really hard to write the book for kids in diaspora because they are living in different countries and they are living in different cultural background. So, like it is challenging that how do you create their uh, national identity, and also how do you take their cultural identity in account, because kids are growing up in the United States. You can't always talk about Uyghur. You can't always tell Uyghur story to them. You need to put something from the United States. And for example, that kids grow up in Europe, like you can't always talk about Uyghur fairy tales or Uyghur heroes or Uyghur like scholars' story. And you should put something about their life. So it is really challenging because like the motherland is far away from them, and the culture in the motherland also far away from them. And it's hard for them to imagine their culture that far away from them 1,000 kilometers. So it is a real challenge how to put this present culture and the culture they had in their motherland. It's the challenging part. Another part that because of we have uh, separated the community, and it's really hard to send those books. It's really expensive, like because it's not a business. No one do it as a business. You should do it as a volunteer, as something like non-profit. But the the price is really high. Like if you write, and then someone who should illustrate, and someone should publish, and someone should send. If you write in English, no problem. There is a publishing company, there is a distributor, there is a bookstore. But like if you write in Uyghur, in Tibetan, in Mongolian, it is hard because there is no like publishing houses, there is no distributor, no one making money from those languages. So this is challenging. And the third part, because of like the contents in English in major languages, it's colorful, it's really good, but in the contents we created, tell you the truth, it's not that good, because we are just few people and we create very few contents, and it's not that competitive for their English language books, or like German or French language books. But we are trying, and I have finished my 9 children books already, and I'm preparing another 5. And also, like, I hope we will find some solution to distribute those books, and to encourage students read those books. We are still keep trying to how to spread, and how to encourage kids to those books, and how to use those books. But it's good still, like people are really supportive. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Abduveli, for sharing your perspective. And without further ado, I will move on to Dr. Gallo. Dr. Gallo, you have mentioned that China's mandatory boarding schools would destroy Tibet's culture and identity if they are not stopped, right? But this this policy is not new. It all started during the Cultural Revolution, when the government had banned the teaching of Tibetan in many schools. So, could you share your insights on the anticipated long-term impacts of the children's psychological well-being and cultural identity? How do you envision these influences shaping their sense of self and their connection to their heritage as they mature into adulthood? And you've also mentioned about how you have visited over 50 boarding preschools in eastern Tibet for 3 years, right? And can you also share with us what kind of consequences that you had to face when you had raised your voice against this policy? Dr. Gallo, the screen is yours.
Thank you for raising this question. I think our young kids, even age 4 to 6 kids in the boarding preschool, it's on the way to pulling out from the cultural roots because of the separation from their parents and the community. I spent a 4-year summer, did the field work and visited more than 50 schools. I think all those dialogue with the different people, parents, school teachers, principal, community members, are affiliated into the conclusion of our own young generation in the way that's going to disappear in the future culturally. If we'll not be able to stop it, or we will not be able to reverse the policy. That's I think within 15, 20 years, it's going to end. The 4,700 years history of the Tibetan civilization going to end up there. It's quite serious things. So I published the two material Tibetan culture-based reading book from grade 1 to 16 when I was in Tibet. Now I think it's time to revise it to distribute to diaspora community, Tibetan community, to share the same knowledge with what they have had before inside Tibet. They needed to build up the same psychological foundation and the cultural value. That's so important to tie them in the future in the same psychological foundation.
Thank you, Dr. Gallo. So, Mr. Dugarjab, since you have already mentioned regarding the commonality, comparing the education in the southern Mongolia to the Tibetan and the Uyghurs, I would like to move directly to the second question for you. Mr. Dugarjab, you have witnessed the first-hand changes in southern Mongolia, and you have been a vocal critic of the policies imposed there, like Dr. Gallo and Mr. Abduveli. So can you share a specific story or example that illustrates the impact of these educational policies on a personal level? Also, how are the Southern Mongolian organizations in the diaspora working together or collaborating with other international human rights and cultural preservation groups to amplify their voice and extend their reach? Mr. Dugajab, the screen is yours.
Thank you. So when I was a young kid in school, in my that small area region that I'm from, most Mongolian children did not speak Chinese, and especially when I was actually even younger, about 7-8 years, we would rarely see Chinese people coming into our area. And we would be very curious to see the Chinese people, and we would be following them and looking at everything they do, everything they say, and looking at the way they talk to one another, because we don't understand the language. We will be imitating that as part of our play, things like that. Now it's turning the other way around. So this is a big difference. And in terms of, the educational policy and the practice of decades long Chinese policies impacting our future generation, the most painful thing, disheartening thing, is to not be able to talk to your future generation in the same language. For example, nowadays, my brother is a little exception because he's very strict in his home, and he asks his children to speak Mongolian at home. But other, relatives, including my sister, and if I talk to them, I speak Mongolian, and then the kids will be answering back in Chinese. So the good thing is, it's still good part is that they understand somewhat what you are saying. So come another 20 years, none of what you are saying, the future kids will definitely not understand you. So at that time, we will be totally, people living in totally different world. Only in name we are Mongolian. So that's a very, very dramatic and very serious impact of this education that has been going on for decades. So As I mentioned earlier, that the Sinicization, the level of Sinicization among Mongols, especially in the so-called Inner Mongolia Autonomous Region, is most serious within these three regions because of the history. The Chinese migration started early, and then it's easier for the Chinese to come over. For example, to Tibet, the Chinese have the natural, difficulties, the high altitude and things like that. But the Mongolian region, they can just walk and get to the region easily compared to other areas. So because of that, it is more challenging comparatively. This educational policy is to the Mongols than anyone else. And then the most the most malicious part of the new Chinese educational system, the educational policy of banning the Mongol language from being taught in schools, is that it's way gone too far, even for the Chinese. A lot of Chinese would agree with us, because Mongolians never refused to learn Chinese. Same as Uyghurs and Tibetans as well. It's a language, it's a tool. If you see language purely as a tool, then that's fine. But why would you be, prohibited from from studying your own language? That is the problem. And while the Mongolians are most Sinicized as a result of the Chinese policies, the Chinese are still not satisfied. They want to wipe out your language and other cultural characteristics altogether, totally. So it's most challenging. But then unique to the Mongolians is there is a country called Mongolia. Of course, there are nuances and difficulties. The Mongolia's reliance on China economically and political pressure. And there are lots of difficulties. But still, it is there. And for Mongols, it's a resource to utilize. And then for Tibetans, of course, there's the exiled community, and the exiled community is doing a lot of work that is, valuable for Tibetans all over. So, all in all, what I'm trying to say is there's hope. And what else can we say? So we should not give up on trying to preserve our identity, our language. First and foremost is the language. And with language, everything starts. So I would say, let's work harder. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dovaja, for this really wonderful. I'll just mute Mr. Dovaja. Okay, thank you, Mr. Dovaja, for this really wonderful ending to our discussion. It has been a really long one, but I'm really glad that we could get the comprehensive information regarding China's education policy in East Turkestan, Southern Mongolia, and Tibet. Thank you so much, everyone. And as we conclude today's enriching panel discussion, I would like to extend my heartfelt gratitude to our esteemed speakers, Mr. Abdulweli Ayub, Dr. Diallo, and Mr. Dugurjab El Hotala for their insightful contribution and for shedding light on the profound challenges and implication of China's education policies on ethnic minorities. Your expertise and your first-hand experiences have not only informed us but also inspired us to consider the urgency and the relevance of advocating for educational practices. It is through such discussions that we hope to influence change and promote policies that upholds the dignity and the rights of every cultural group. Thank you so much. And thank you to everyone who is involved in our discussion today. And before I end, I would like to say that the video of the session will be uploaded on AFI's website, and please follow AFI's X, Facebook, and LinkedIn pages for more information on AFI's programs and activities. Thank you so much, everyone. I wish we could extend more, but then due to the time, we cannot. Thank you, and I really enjoyed hearing all of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.